first of all, it's Janice Hartley. I had a father, a brother, a cousin, a nephew, and they were all David Hartley, and I thought, why not? I won't have to change my name. But I did grow up in this house from the time I was born, and it was a fascinating house to live in. And by the time I came along, my grandfather Roland was mellower maybe than he'd been with his own children, and therefore he had fun with me and I had fun with him. And he'd sit me down on his lap after I was ready for bed in the Dr. Denton's with the drop seat that smelled like oatmeal when they were new. And he'd put me on his lap and tell me stories about the Ojibwe in Minnesota. And then he would go into his dance. Hartley will remember. And, he'd have my hair standing on end and stories about the logging. And he'd, I think I told you this about the cigar. He'd always have his cigar. And he'd take the cellophane off and light the end, and we'd watch the smoke swirl into that cellophane thing. And then he'd put the ring on my finger. And it was just a joy. It was just really wonderful. And I guess I had a fondness for Minnesota through the stories that he had. And he said he had been made a blood brother of the Ojibwe tribe. That impressed me. And he was an orator. And I hope that we can persuade Hartley to give one of Roland's wonderful speeches, because Hartley knows every word, and it makes my neck stand on end, or the hair, what hair is left stands on end. And it was a place where we sat at a very formal table, always linen napkins, and we children were instructed to sit like this. Jean will remember. We had to sit with our hands at the edge of the table, and we did not speak. and they would go on and on about politics. And they would start arguing about politics. And I remember one time when I must have been about 3 or 4, and there was a small break in the political discussion. And I said, "Did you know Clark Gable has switched to Dodge?" Trying to break the mood. And Roland would come down every morning, and he'd have a kind of a jigger, like a large jigger glass with 2 raw eggs in it. And we'd sit there in fascination as he went, with his raw egg every morning. And he said, "That's what keeps me strong." And and if you remember, there was a big turntable out in the garage. And my best friend, Ludi Agnew, just lived on the corner, 2301. And we were within 6 months of each other, and bosom friends, we've always called ourselves. And she would come over to play with me. Roland would put us on the turntable of the cars, and he'd stand there with a broomstick and start walking on this thing till it would go faster and faster till we sort of tumble off the edge. And then he'd play hide and seek with us, where he would take one of us and hide us up on top of a far wood pile or some other obscure place, and then he'd have the fun of watching the other one try to find us. But he was really a charming figure to me, and a kind of a legend in his life, I think, and I just thought he was nice to me. And Grandma Hartley always seemed very nervous and troubled and trying to keep things smooth, and with a Hartley man, that's an art. And for some reason, all of the Hartleys, including the distaff side, are control freaks. And each of us is right, and so there are some lively discussions. But this is just a joy to be with all my wonderful cousins I haven't seen for too long. But I knew the Browns pretty well because when Sue and Ralph had been stationed over in Munich during the war, they came back and they stopped in Eveleth. And we really we had so darn much fun with them. And Dave would come in from the mine on a Sunday morning, and we'd all be regaled, and I with about 80 curlers in my hair and a big apron. And it was just the huge family that I always wanted. There they all were. And Noel even was sent to us one summer when Sue said she'd had enough. Janny, would you please take Noel? And I said, give her to me. She was at the age of independence, and Sue couldn't stand that. Oh, I wish I could. Oh, you're welcome anytime. All you have to do is crawl through the clutter. There's a bed somewhere. But it was a wonderful childhood to live here. And on big holidays, the family would all end up at that big table, and there was a cook in the kitchen called Telsie. She spent many probably horrid hours with me, as I would be slow to eat my oatmeal and slow to eat my prunes, and I'd be left there till they were gone, and so Telsie put up with me. And then Julia the maid had some children that would come every now and then. And one kitchen memory I have is up in the cupboard toward the dining room. She had this row of wonderful little brown custard cups. And I loved custard, but those cups they're kind of an iconic symbol in my mind. But it was great, and there was a place in the pantry, the past pantry, under a metal sink where I could fit a little table and chair. And I loved getting in that little place, and Telsie would give me the pulp from the orange juice. And that was just lovely. And there was a little closet off the billiard room downstairs that they gave to me as a playhouse. And I drew the windows, with the curtains and the little scene out the picture. And I had this marvelous moth-eaten teddy bear, gold. And Mamie at that time had a small rabbit from Vassar or Dana Hall named Beelzebub. But it was a charmed place to live as a child, and on the big holidays when all the cousins would come, Roland would get out just at these occasions a round thing that had holes like Q-sized, like pool-sized balls with numbers, and we'd roll them into those little pockets, and the other thing he would do, if it was Thanksgiving, he'd weigh us all before dinner, and again after dinner, and whoever won, I can't remember what the prize was. It was just, whoever gained the most money won, or gained the most weight won. And but
Hartley, hands down.
Gretchen?
There was one story.
Rick, is this microphone working?
Thank you. I'm Gretchen, Sue's daughter, Janny's sister, Janny's niece. But in any event, there was a story Mom used to tell about you maybe in a bathroom, and there was a lady across the way.
Oh, that wasn't in this house.
Oh, it wasn't, excuse me.
That was when Papa was going to be independent of his parents, and we moved kitty corner and 3 houses up in a pair of houses that were...
It's null and void.
Gretchen, do you think I should really tell that story here? No, Jane says no. No.
Jan, let me interrupt you just for a minute to clarify something. We'd like to collect as much information as we can. We will send you the raw, Rich, with the help of David and Rick, we'll send you the raw DVDs You can look through it and see if anything's too colorful. We won't put it on the website. So don't be afraid we're going to abscond with some private family stuff and put it anywhere.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. It's history, isn't it? Well, I think I've gone on enough, but,
No,
oh, in those days, we had a great big ice box, you know, and it was in the kitchen in a separate little room, and it had a door to the outside, and we'd wait for that iceman to come with a big leather thing and the tongs and this thing over his shoulder, and he had horses. So it was a thrill, you know, when the iceman would come, and in that would go. And in the refrigerator, Grandma always kept a big plate of butter balls. And they were made with two paddles that were striated, and when you went like this, it kind of made cross hatches, and I would sneak in there and butter balls, one after the other, and sugar. And it was really fun. Oh,
Hey, Janny, how long were you living?
And Janny, how long were you living here? How many years?
Until I was 7.
So at least 7 years.
Yep.
Okay, and before, with the other children, your sisters and so forth, were they here before that? Before
No,
you said when you
I
were born.
believe we all came at the same time. And
Did you pick up Jamie's microphone? Thanks, Jamie.
Which was your room? Where's your room?
I didn't have a room of my own. I started out in a crib in poor Mother and Papa's bedroom. They had twin beds, and it was the bedroom let me see, it was, Grandma's bedroom was in that corner. No.
Second floor.
Second floor on, I'm mixed up.
Southeast.
Southeast corner, and then Mother and Papa had the next room, and Roland had his room next to Grandma's, which was his room was the closest to the billiards room. And he had a strop in the kitchen, you know, he'd do his razor, which was fascinating. Jack the knife. And I remember that we didn't have screens on the windows, and moths would come in, and I can remember just being terrified, because I would be in bed first, and I wouldn't go to sleep for I just never went to sleep early, and I would go on the crib with they had cages over my fingers because I sucked my thumb. So I could And Mother would go in the closet and change her clothes, and she would drop the shoes. And I would go in the closet later, and say, I'm going to make a sound like a mother. And I would go in and drop shoes. But I can't think of anything else of interest.
Aunt Janny, one more thing though.
But,
I
honey?
had always understood that Roland was a prankster. Were there any pranks?
He was an inveterate practical joke player. I just can't stand practical jokes, but he had a good time with it. He had a very good time with it. And when Mary Paul came with her wonderful suitor, Tom, Roland just tried his very best to upset this poor young man, meeting this family for the first time, and gave him what was called a dribble glass. And so it would have ice water in it, and he'd start to drink, and he'd go, oh dear, you know. Can you imagine that poor man? Oh gosh. And then he had another unbreakable glass that looked like cut crystal, that he'd come in the living room, and he'd say, oh my golly, I dropped it. And he'd sort of heave it like a bowling ball, and it would hit the furniture, and Nina would say, oh, Roland, you know. Well, and of course it wouldn't break, but everyone else, and he had a jar that looked like raspberry jam. And he would always be sure that the guest of honor, usually some poor little woman, And he would say, have some raspberry jam homemade. So she would open the top and out would go one of those springs. Remember that, Decker? I know. Yes, and he just loved a good joke. Well, and then the bathtub. There's a, oh, Jane, what?
I'm Janny's daughter, Jane. Yeah, give me that thing.
Hello.
Hello, all my fans. I wanted to ask about the furniture in the dining room when didn't he purposely?
When Mother moved in to this house with a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and apparently the new surprise, born 3 months to the day after the crash. And the first thing David did when he came in on this beautiful mahogany buffet was go up with his jackknife and make a little notch in it. And poor Mama and Papa, this beautiful furniture. But Grandpa Clough heard about that. He came over and he stood in front of that buffet and he went, ah, like that. Gave it a big kick and he said, there, now we can enjoy it. Oh, and it's of note that Adelaide and Governor Dave Marston Clough followed their daughter quite shortly when she went off with this madman to Everett and built the house next door, which became an apartment house. And I remember meeting Allie Bell in that apartment that faced here up on the second floor, and that's the apartment Mama and Papa lived in after they sold the house out on Mukilteo Boulevard. So there are ties there. And
Yeah, you can see that very easily.
right, yes, right over there. And in between was a garden. Roland really prided himself on the garden. And Gretty, does everything so perfectly and well and obediently. She would be picking the weeds very carefully, and David tried. And Sue would just push the dirt over the on top of the weeds. And Alice Bell's mother lived with them in that apartment, and I used to take chickweed for her canary named Dickie Bird. And once I found a stray cat down in that garden, carried this filthy creature up to Mrs. White, who lived with Alice and Evan in that apartment, and gave her this lovely present, put this cat on her bed, and she said, and Allie Bell said she's terrified of cats. But it was a very exciting place to live. And David used to go from the top floor. Oh, yeah. That is why we named our son John. But David would start up on the third floor where the laundry chute goes down past the kitchen and into the basement. He would go down on the inside of it all the way down with a concrete floor at the bottom. And on that same stairway that went past the thing, every Thanksgiving and Christmas would be a little wooden crate of what we then called Japanese oranges, those wonderful little clementines. And it was only then, and man, we just would have a wonderful time opening those little oranges. And Uncle Edward had a wonderful place out on Mukilteo Boulevard where all the family would gather for 4th of July and other occasions, but I mostly remember 4th of July. Hartley, you would be tearing around just having the greatest time. And Roland didn't approve of, of the modern age very much. And the girls were just starting to don these very modest two-piece bathing suits. I mean, it must have shown an inch of midriff, and they were very well covered. And they also had lipstick, and Roland would sit in one of those wonderful Southampton chairs. What are those? Adirondack. Thank you, John. He'd sit there and he'd say, Janice, and I would go over and he'd say, when you grow up, don't you ever paint your face like those hussies. He said, look at them, the big naked buffaloes. And here were these sylph-like, beautiful girls. And that, she said, is that. I think I've regaled you far enough, but thank you.